Hello everybody, and for this video I'm going to show you a game I played last night in the London League. This game was played against King's Head, and I was on board 9 against Simon Randall, who is rated 195 ECF, which is roughly 2200 FIDE. I was black in this game with the time control of 75 minutes for 30 moves, and then 15 minutes added on at the end. So he started off with e4, and I played knight f6, as I usually do. Then he played knight c3. So here we have the Alekhine declined, where there's a few options. You can play e6, going into a kind of French. There's also c5 for a Sicilian, c6 for a very odd Caracan, and e5 will take you into the Vienna, which is generally the main move. But I play the Scandinavian line with d5. And white has a few options. One is to play perhaps d4, doing the Black Mardima gambit, giving up the e4 pawn for rapid development and initiative. White can take and also play e5, pushing the pawn, which will take us into a interesting position. He chose to take with the pawn, and I recaptured. Then bishop c4. So we now reach a Scandinavian opening, and usually the best move is knight b6. Afterwards, my opponent said he doesn't really think that is such a strong move. Perhaps e6 is a little bit better, according to him. I don't really know yet if I agree. I haven't studied it as much as I probably ought to if I play this opening. But he drops the bishop back, and here I can't help but feel my development is a little bit underwhelming. The bishop on f8 can't yet move, which means I can't castle. So I played knight c6, knight f3, and that stops bishop g4, actually, because if bishop g4, he has bishop takes f7 check. After I take it, knight g5 check attacks the king, of course, and it also would attack my bishop with the queen, so he would win the piece back. So I was a little bit nervous about white playing d4 and then d5, which is a classic pawn break in lines in the Queen's Gambit, declined or Queen's Gambit accepted. So I didn't develop the c8 bishop. I thought for a long time about moving it to f5, but then I thought d4, and then perhaps the bishop could go to f4, and then white can break with d5, and I won't have had enough time to castle. So I played e6, white castles, bishop e7, and I was rather surprised by the move a4. I thought d4 was definitely going to be played with the idea of playing d5 next move, but apparently not. So a4 is a way of preserving his bishop pair. I had been thinking about playing knight a5 at some point to get his bishop, so that gives him the a2 square to run to. So, okay, not a bad move. And perhaps I didn't play the best move here. I just wanted to complete development by castling. But as I was looking at the position, I realized that a5 could be a good move for white, making my knight move. And I was looking at knight d5, and then if he wanted, he could capture and try and use the open e file with the rook. But I wasn't too concerned. I just thought a5 might be an annoying space-grabbing move. However, he played d4 first, and now I play knight a5. So after the bishop drops back, I had the plan of playing like a queen's gambit declined, where usually black is stopping white from pushing d5 and will break with the move c5. So that's what I did, trying to get my bishop on c8 active by moving it to d7 and then to c6. But now bishop f4 was played, very active move, a good developing move. So I'd wondered what should I do, and I eventually came to the conclusion that I should take on d4, remove the central pawn, and even though white has 3 against 2 on the queen side, I feel that my pieces are well coordinated enough to put quite a lot of pressure on white's pawns. Perhaps bishop d7, though, is the right move, because it would develop my bishop, allow my rook to come to c8, and also target the a4 pawn. But first I take, and I was expecting knight takes pawn, then I would probably play bishop d7, and follow it up with knight a5 to c4. But here he surprised me. He played the move knight b5. And that's quite a common move, actually, in from black's perspective, where black will often move his knight to b4 and then put it on d5. So that's the usual point of the move. But here, c7 is a very weak square, and my rook on a8 is dangerously exposed. So I wasn't quite sure what to do here. Lots of moves seem to give him a very good play. So the computer recommends knight c6 and just kind of steering into the skid after bishop c7, and my queen's running out of squares. Queen d7. It can't go to e8 because then bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and knight c7 would fork the queen and rook. So queen d7 is forced. Knight e5. And again, queen e8 is not playable. So knight takes e5, bishop takes, and he's still technically a pawn down, but he'll regain it very soon. And again, my rook and pieces are very, very badly coordinated. Knight takes a5, a4 may be best. Just planning on giving up the exchange here for a couple of pawns. So I would reach this position where, again, my bishop on c8 is a bit inactive, and white's pieces are still very well connected together. There's lots of threats. My d4 pawn is probably not going to survive contact with the enemy, so it might only be a pawn for the exchange, with black having a slight initiative on the queen side due to the passed a pawn. So, to be honest, I like white in this position, but it's not the end of the world. I can definitely play this. So that was a move I didn't really look at very much. I was looking at moves like bishop d7, but then bishop c7 for white is very strong. So I ended up playing knight a to c4. And the reason I do this is to take out the e5 square, stop white's knight just coming to e5 without being challenged. And I'm planning on playing knight d6 next move, and that would cut off the white pieces coordinating on c7. And it also attacks the b2 pawn and threatens to play knight takes b2, the white queen moves, and then knight takes a4, winning 2 pawns. So bishop c7 was the move I looked at, and now queen d7 is practically forced. Queen e2 going after my c4 knight. And at this point, I was in a bit of trouble here. His pieces are all very well protected by each other. There's no loose pieces. And I've just got too many loose pieces for him to target. The knight on c4 is definitely a target. The rook on a8 might become possible to attack later. My queen is very insecure on d7. So if I move my knight on c4, then knight to e5 looks very good. And the d4 pawn, of course, is dropping off, so I'm not really a pawn up. Also, a5 can be played by white at any point, which might either deflect my knight or cause the knight on b6 to move away, which would weaken the c4 square. So the move I played maybe wasn't the best on a human level, but it was good according to the computer. My opponent recommended after the game that I play bishop d6, trying to just swap off and keep my keep my position tenable. And to be honest, I didn't really like this because bishop takes bishop, knight takes, and then either take my knight first or play rook fd1. And okay, I'm not losing a pawn, I'm just staying equal on pawns, and white still has a pawn majority, but it is double pawns. But again, my development is still very questionable, and I don't really think I'm going to equalize here. I think rook d8 may be best, trying to swap off rooks, but then after he takes, he can then get the other rook active, and I think my best option is going into a self-pin with white, just throwing up more and more pressure against my pinned piece. So I absolutely hate this position, and while it may be just about playable from a computer perspective, it's definitely not pleasant to have to face over the board. So bishop d7 is considered one of the stronger moves, and so is my move. I played a6, giving up on trying to be equal, and settling for being slightly worse. So he took with the bishop, I captured, queen takes, and now I take the knight, he gets the pawn back, and d4 is still a target. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook. So at this point, we're technically equal on pawns, and I have the 2 bishops in an open position, but my d4 pawn is very loose. So I defend it with bishop f6, and I'm trying to play e5 in the next few moves. Just trying to support the pawn, and then maybe I can untangle myself from this horrible, horrible position. Rook a8, so maybe not, I'm just pinned now. And here, I actually played a move which was not very good, but luckily my opponent didn't take full advantage of it. The move I played was rook e8, trying to support the e5 pawn push. But instead, queen d5 is an interesting idea. I would take off the queens, reaching an endgame, and I have doubled isolated pawns. So basically, I'm going to lose a pawn, but perhaps I have drawing chances in a minor piece endgame. So b6 is quite good for white, and then this actually allows me to not lose a pawn. but white definitely has a better position. So, for example, here, we could draw by repetition if white wants to draw, but there's also chances for white to gain an initiative here, where I think it is drawn. It's fairly level, but white has all the chances to win. My bishop is going to be horribly tied down to defending the b7 pawn, and white's rook and knight can be very aggressive in attacking me. So again, I think this is drawn, but it's very hard to draw if I went into that line, but I didn't. So after rook a8, I played rook e8, and luckily he played the move which was a prophylactic move, a safe move, h3, just giving a little bit of luft for his king, a bit of air for his king, just preventing any back rank checkmating ideas that I might have. Instead, though, he should play more actively with bishop g3. I know, I say more actively and I'm retreating the bishop, but sometimes you need to go backwards to move forwards. The point of this move is that now the queen and rook are targeting the c8 bishop. So the black queen and rook are tied down to defending the bishop. And that means he can be more aggressive and perhaps infiltrate even more than he already has done, to create multiple weaknesses in my camp. Now e5 is impossible because if I were to capture, he could then capture the bishop on c8 because my rook would eventually be deflected from its defense. So g6 might be good here to give some lift for my king. Knight e5, queen d8, now b6. So again, that's taking advantage of the fact that the queen can't move away from the defense of the c8 bishop. King g7, queen c7. So again, white can just keep on increasing the pressure. Bishop e7. And the knight on e5 looks pretty, but it isn't really doing a lot, so let's put it on a better square. The knight's heading for d6 now. h5. Bishop d6 first, just trade off bishops. Black probably won't want that, but I think he doesn't have much choice very soon. And black is completely tied down. He has to make passing moves like rook g8. So let's just target a few more pawns and pieces. Black stuck, not doing anything. Now the knight can come to d6, where it's attacking the bishop multiple times. So the best line I could find was queen takes queen, pawn takes, bishop e5, bishop takes pawn, just temporarily sacking a piece, rook takes. And now what's horrible is that if I take his rook, he can promote with knight takes c8, bishop e5, then knight d6, and game over. So bishop b6, I think, is forced. Rook takes, bishop takes, and now just to play nice and simple, knight e8 check, king takes rook, knight takes bishop. End of game. White's simply a knight up and can easily round up the b7 pawn and have two connected passed pawns. So luckily this did not happen in the game, but I did realise that I was losing, and it would be very tricky for white to win. Some of those moves aren't too natural looking, but it does show that my position is so cramped that white should be able to take advantage of it by infiltrating and just increasing the pressure incrementally. There's no rush in this sort of position when black is completely paralysed. So fortunately h3 was played, which gave me time to play queen d5, and now he took, I recaptured, And again, I've got the idea of d3, which will get rid of my double isolated pawns and not lose a pawn. So bishop e5 was played, again taking advantage of the fact that my rook is tied down to defending the bishop. But here I saw a bailout line, and I felt I'd been worse the whole game, so I had to bail out to a draw with bishop takes bishop, knight takes, and there is a move here which does draw. And that is bishop d7. So I'm attacking both the rook and the knight with my own rook, and that forces the exchange with rook takes, bishop takes, and here I felt that if my opponent wanted an advantage, he could play b6, but that may allow me to play f6 and then run over with my king, and I might just be able to avoid losing. Also, bishop b5 is possible, and then playing f6 to force the white knight much further away from the b6 pawn. So he played knight f3, and if I take the pawn immediately, then when he takes back with the knight, his knight will be on the commanding d4 square, which will be very good for white and probably winning. So I first threw in the saving Zwischenzug with d3. And he pretty much has to take it, to which I then take the pawn and am back on equal terms in material. So here, after d4, my opponent offered me a draw, and I did accept it. Although when we look at this position, the computer gives me a tiny advantage, but I am not inclined to believe the computer is correct here. I think it's going off principle where it says that there are multiple areas of the board where there are pawns, therefore activity. So that means that when there's a lot of activity all over the board, a bishop is slightly better than a knight. But the downside to that is that both my pawns are on light squares on the queen side, which means my bishop is technically a bad bishop. And what's worse, the white pawns are on dark squares, so I can't attack them. And that means that my bishop is going to be of little use in capturing pawns on the queen side, which means I'm going to have to concentrate all my efforts on the king side, and all the activity will be on the king side, where lots of pawns will be exchanged, and when there's only activity on one area of the board, that means the knight is better than a bishop, as it will be able to control lots and lots of squares on the king side, whereas a bishop could only ever control the light squares. I don't think white can really win this, but he can give it a go. And I don't really think black has any chance of winning. And finally, the fact that I have isolated pawns means that the knight is going to be very useful in attacking them, whereas my bishop is only going to be defending. It's going to be passive, and I can't really win with a passive position in this sort of endgame. So a draw is the best result I can get, and as he offered it to me, I may as well accept. So overall, not the most exciting game of chess ever. I just sort of wanted to show this, partly because I want to show all my games and show that I have bad games all the time, really, and occasionally good games. But what I liked from my opponent, to be honest, who I think probably deserved to win, was that he played very actively. He got his pieces on good squares. Even on a2, the bishop is still controlling a key diagonal. I was floundering about trying to find a plan by shoving the pawn up, and he just got his pieces onto very good squares, controlling key squares like c7. He seized the initiative early and didn't mind about losing a pawn temporarily, because he knew he could win it back eventually. So after I'm in a complete mess, he perhaps could have played it a little bit better, but he's won a pawn now, effectively. The d4 pawn's going. And then infiltrated. Excellent. He's played that almost perfectly. And he's basically done everything he needs to. He's got the rook on a perfect square on a8. The queen is also very active in the centre. Bishop on c7 is infiltrating and putting pressure on me. And the f3 knight is also attacking that d4 pawn. So I think here he felt that he'd got a good position, and then he put the brakes on a little. He thought he'd play it more safe with the move h3, which led to me being able to swap off and bail out for a draw. But as I said, when you're on the attack, when you've infiltrated, don't slow down. You need to keep on increasing your hold over the position until the enemy is completely paralysed. So there I had the queen d5 move. Now I don't. Now I'm completely tied down to c8. My bishop on f6 is not very pretty. It can't do much. And as I showed, white can just use this pin and the deflection tactic on c8 to be able to just paralyze me completely. And now he would have time for moves like h3 and the like, because after this I'm just making passing moves with my rook. There's nothing else I can do. If I swap, I'm giving that pawn on b6 an even better square on c7, where it's as good as a piece on c7. It's a constant threat of promotion tactics. So even here, white doesn't even need to play knight d6, which would force the winning line. He could even move the king all the way to d3, where it would be more active, and then play the move knight d6. So this game was a bit of a disaster for me, where I somehow managed to not lose. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video about infiltration and how to play this sort of position. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.